keeping something about my background short. I've been in the field of helping people for about 40 years. I have 2 advanced degrees, one from Yale and one from the University of Connecticut, a total of 5 years of advanced study in psychology and spirituality, and the intersection point as being the place where transformation happens. I love what I do. Can you tell I love what I do? And I was wondering how I might be able to introduce you to the 3 books, and I'm going to do it this way. Now, I'm going to tell you secrets about each book that are not in the book. And then if you're intrigued, fantastic. So the first book I'm going to talk to you about is something called Wake Up to Your Whole Life. And everybody says, why is the W in parentheses? Well, you have to read the book then. I'm not going to tell you that secret. However, I will tell you this secret. Back in 2000, John and I moved to New Hampshire, 65 acres of land, and I'd been working pretty steadily. I think I said something like 200,000 hours of listening to people's stories, mostly adults and couples and groups. And I was sitting in my hot tub one day, which I insisted upon because in New Hampshire it gets cold. But also I worked hard in New Hampshire on the land. And I was sitting there one day and suddenly, literally, all of a sudden there was this image of a map that was the universal journey we all go on. Now, we're all on a riverboat trip, true? And yet we would all say that each of us is experiencing the riverboat differently, true? Even if we all went on the canal ride, we each had a different experience of the canal ride. Our lives are the same. So in this first book, what I did was unfold the map of our life that we all go on, but we experience entirely differently. I'll tell you that in a minute. Part of what had started happening was that with the big number of self-help, self-development possibilities that there are offered, people were coming in, and I call them my apprentices or my students. I really don't like the word client personally. Feels a little hierarchical. Were partners in the journey. And they were coming in and I'd say, so what brings you to talk to me? And they'd say, well, I'm an adult child of an alcoholic and I've read the book about the this and the that, and they give me the names of the things that were wrong with them. And then they would continue to say that in this book it said, because I'm adult child of something or other, adult child of divorce or adult child of whatever, I should then do this thing and that thing, but it didn't work. So a part of the problem is what I realized when I was sitting in my hot tub was that they were trying to follow a cookie cutter approach to a problem, but none of us are the same. If you took, for example, a field of roses and you said, this one is perfect. I love emphasis that comes accidentally. If you took one rose and you held it up and you said, this rose is perfect, it makes all the other ones imperfect. It's the same thing that's happening. This is the one way to help somebody who has experienced a hard thing in life. Well, then what about everybody else that it doesn't fit for? So as I was sitting in the hot tub, I realized that the common statement was, I'm in the pits. I fell in a hole. And all of a sudden, there was this map. That's the one that's in Wake Up to Your Whole Life, this book. And I realized that they were all describing falling in a hole. Oh my gosh, I'm standing in the middle of a hole on the floor here. And they were all trying to climb out of the hole. But what does that mean? The hole's still there to fall back into. So in my tub, I realized that the secret that it had taken me 30 years to realize and a zillion different theories to study was that there was a door at the bottom of the hole, and people could discover it for themselves. That's quite exciting in my book. So I'll tell you a short little story about that, and then I'm gonna talk about another thing. So there was this person deep in a hole, and he's looking up there, and there is this teeny circle of light, and he's screaming up the hole, help, 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 thinking if somebody actually comes, they'd probably throw down a ladder, a rope, maybe they'd send someone down and loop them around like on a helicopter lift. And finally, after a long time, he sees a head silhouetted above in the light. It's quite exciting. He can't wait. He knows it's going to be some fantastic rescue. And all of a sudden, bang! The person leaped in the hole with him. He's so mad. What are you doing now? We're both stuck here. This is terrible. We're never going to get any place. And after he had his temper tantrum and exhausted himself, the person who had jumped in said, are you ready to hear what I have to say? All right, what else are we going to do? We're stuck in here for a real long time now. The guy says, I jumped in because I know a secret. At the bottom of this hole, there's a door, and I brought the key. At the basis of this book is the map. So I'll tell you the story, our universal story. Here we would say, we flew from home, we got onto a river boat, we went from here to here to here to here to here, and then we went home. True? And you would flesh it out your own way. In our lives, it sounds like this. Each one of us is born whole and unconscious with a fantastically huge, sensitive, loving, and generous heart, ready to love, be loved, and be loving. And then junk happens. I call it horrible because it can feel horrible to us. Big or little horribles. Hits our hearts, we say ouch at a completely unconscious level and immediately create a solution. And the solution is, I'll just blame some part of myself for what happened, even if what happened was them doing something. I'll get rid of it. Perfect. I'll just chuck it over there and I won't ever do that again. And I'm relieved because now I believe, just like if I clean my plate, Santa Claus will come. Getting rid of that part means that horrible thing won't happen again. And I merrily go on my way, not knowing that I had done that. And we do it over and over and over and over again, and then we grow up and we don't know we did that. Short example, and I'm switching to the other book. So there was this little kid, she's sitting on the floor, 3, 4, 5, and she's singing, I love myself, I'm happy, making lots of noise. Can't you all imagine that? Grandchildren, children, and somebody walks by, happens to be in a bad mood, and says, oh, it makes so much noise. And without realizing it, that little person concludes something's wrong with the voice. Says, I'm going to be quiet. Pushes it to the far side, let's say puts it way over there, and walks over here and makes a big space between them and that expression. And they vow, I will never make noise like that again. And then they grow up and their boss thinks they're fantastic and their boss says, I want you to give a presentation. Uh-oh, problem. Now voice is being needed. It's at that point that most of the time people do things like take voice lessons, assertiveness training, blah, 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 but the rejection of that part has been pushed deep inside. In this book, it outlines how to do it, the map itself, and it's fleshed out uniquely for each person, not a cookie cutter approach. Clear? On to the next book. The second book is in a completely different direction. So this book is like a textbooky, not quite a workbook because there's lots of pictures in it, but it does take you through the process. I had someone come, say, I've worked and worked and worked, I don't know what to do and I'm sick of what's happening to me. And I said, well, we could work and work and work. You could take this book, go to the top of a mountain, follow the directions, and come find me after you did that. She did. Nobody'd ever done that before. 3 days later, she arrived back after camping at the top of the mountain. It's New Hampshire, after all. And she knocks on the door and she says, "Thank you very much. I feel freer than I've ever felt. And I'll let you know if I ever need to talk to you again." And I haven't seen her since. This book, the second book, is Alaya's Fables. Now this book is an entirely different genre. It's stories that I wrote myself for the purpose of opening doorways a different way. People's psyches have different kinds of doorways. Wake Up to Your Whole Life offers a doorway that's more schematic, systematic, and unfolding for the mind, and the heart follows. In Alaya's Fables, we start more with the heart. And in this one, I tell stories that are a combined analogy, allegorical, metaphorical, based on all those hours and hours and hours of listening that I've done. And at the beginning of the book, there is a description of the topics so that you can pick the one you want so you don't read it straight through. This is designed also as a book to connect to the magic in all of us. We're all magic. We believe, remember a long time ago, that if we cleaned our plates, Santa Claus would come? We all believe that. The magic that we believe from that place is embedded in our psychology. And we don't realize we access it and use it right from the beginning of our lives. We make sense to ourselves. How much time do I have? 10? Okay. So I'm going to tell you a short story about me that ties these two together. And it's okay, I'm fine. So I didn't know all about this. I didn't know about the holes. I didn't know about the magic. I just knew I was a little person and hard thing happened. I was 8 years old. And my father, he chose to die. Now, I didn't understand all of that. I just knew that my best friend had disappeared. Unknowingly, unconsciously, I concluded it must have been because I made a mistake. Wasn't sure what the mistake was, but it was probably some mistake I made. And so magically, unconsciously, I said, well, if I'm perfect, if I never make a mistake again, he'll come back, right? Because you know what? Every Easter, the grown-ups in my Protestant church celebrated the dead were risen. So I had confirmation. I didn't even realize that in some way or another that could be tangled up. All went unconscious. So I worked diligently at school, hence all the degrees. They proved useful in the end, but they didn't raise the dead. So one day I'm standing, this was before all of these books came to be, standing and there's this, we're at a burial of someone I didn't know well, and there was a mound of dirt. You know how they put plastic on the dirt to kind of like fake you out? You don't think it's really dirt, it's supposed to cover up the dirt. And I don't understand that exactly. And I was standing next to my sister who happened to also be an MSW like myself, and I turned to her and I said, "No one's in the coffin." And she looks at me, and in a stage whisper, she said, "Shh, we'll talk later." Like, you're crazy. And I couldn't contain myself. And I said, "What do you mean?" "Wait, I know no one's in the coffin." She goes, "Shh." And now everybody's looking at us. This was the beginning of the whole story.
How old were you?
I was 29.
Oh.
But this magical belief had kind of just risen out of nowhere. So I said it again to her, "No one's in the coffin." And she turns to me, and this was the moment it all started to change for me. She turned to me and she said, "Death is final. Like, he's dead." And it collided with the magical thinking of that little girl so long ago. And out of that grew that moment in the hot tub when I realized I pushed away my humanity. The part that could be silly, the part that could laugh in front of a mistake, the part that could say, they can choose what they want. But it's not my job to fight what they chose. You see? That's my story. So let me say one other thing about this other book. This last book is called Wake Up from War, Come Home to Peace. And it's a story of hope that's a combination of these two books in an unusual format. There's a fable about soldier, villager, and the wisdom leader. Just 3 characters. There's also a story about a grand picnic to which everybody in the whole world is invited. And they wrap around each other in this book. Now, the other thing about this book that's very near and dear to me is that I realized that I had 10, so far as my research has gone, 10 different veterans in my family history that I knew about. My grandmother was a private in the Army, all the way to a commander of something that I didn't ever quite understand, but high up. And I began that research because I'd made friends with a veteran down the street who was suffering deeply from PTSD. A friend. And what I began to realize was that I didn't know anybody that had not been touched by war. We all have. It has different shapes, and it has different expressions and different causes, but we're all affected by it. So in a way, we are always encountering one of those 3 characters. Either the soldier that goes off to war and comes home, or possibly the villager that's left behind to tend to the home, and possibly we're also a faith leader. I'm also an ordained minister, a faith leader to whom questions about life and death and why war come to you. And so as I was watching this gentleman, his first name is Howie, he was crippled by the PTSD, and he was an incredibly dear man. This is a very wondrous, happy story. And he got to know me, and we began to play. And he learned about the map, and he read some of the fables. And he began to make sense to himself, which is part of what happens. It doesn't make sense. And ultimately, what happened was he had held in his house, which is a typical PTSD thing, lots and lots of armament to protect from the imagined horrors that could happen. And he did this huge thing. He went home one day and he took all of them over to a friend's house, and he tolerated the nakedness that he had been running from. He's the inspiration for this book. And he now went from hiding in the house, not going anywhere, to being the head of an American Legion of over 300 people, happily alive and thriving. The message of this book is, when one goes to war, we all go to war. And I believe that's true. I also believe that it's time for us to say no more war in the name of anything. Because, well, are we all but human beings? So this book also has another secret, and the secret is this: it was illustrated by a mother-daughter team. The daughter was 15 at the time, and she had a dream that she could go to art school. And this is her first illustrated book. She did with her mom, who was the editor and the one that helped bring this alive mechanically for me. And so the pictures are a creation of a heart's dream. So the secret in the first book is, I came up with it in a hot tub, which looks like a hole, and it's all about holes. The second one is that I love to tell stories, and I believe every story that anybody has ever told to me is precious and dear and uniquely ours. And this third one, this is a cry from me to every person that I encounter. When we meet people, face-to-face people, it's no longer some faceless place over there. It's a person. And that's how we all make a difference about war and peace. So I believe going on a riverboat cruise is about meeting people, finding out we're all human beings from this place, that, or the other, and getting a whole lot more reasons to not go to war. I've got a copy up here, there's one of each, and I also have information cards for me and ways you can find out. You can always look up on YouTube, Alaya Chadwick. There isn't any other one. You'll find me there. You'll see me telling stories to some of the veterans. Part of the original beginning of this last book, Wake Up From War, Come Home to Peace, was birthed at a training for veterans, and I told the beginning story to them upon request there, and I got hearty approval from them that it was true and spoke truth. You can also look up Sanctuary, that's the name of our land, NH for New Hampshire, sanctuarynh.com, and you can see our labyrinth and all of that kind of stuff. If you're near New Hampshire, come visit. The land is open to everybody. The other website I have is wholepoint.us, because all of us are the whole point. Any questions?
Whole with a W?
Sorry?
Whole with a W?
W. Yes, because of wholeness. Isn't that what we want? You're stumbling already to the trick I played on everybody. Yes, so I do hope, thank you very much, and thank you so much for your participation in a riverboat cruise, because I do believe that it's one way that there can be peace on our planet when we meet people face to face. Any other questions? Come find me. We're good? Yes?
It depends. Your first book depends on another person showing the way to out of the hole. Do you always have to have another person to help, or can you do it yourself?
I love your question. Should I say it again? She said, in the first book, Wake Up to Your Whole Life, do you always need to have another person to show you the way out of the hole? I can speak for myself, yes and no. Depends on how lost in the hole you are. So I have worked with somebody for myself to keep my psyche clean for over 30 years, and that's very, very unusual. And she has done the same thing, so when people are talking to me, there's about 150 years of experience on your behalf. Her teacher studied with Jung, and this is very Jungian oriented in its foundations, but it takes a very practical approach. I wanted to give people something that they could use hands and feet at the kitchen sink. You don't want to have another theory. There's 1,000 theories out there. This is what you can do when you're walking around in the world and you get reactive. So in one way, I'd say yes, because if I asked you, do I have a sign on my back? I can't see it. So in that way, the person that you're working with, their job is to see what you can't see. On the other hand, there are some times where people have talked and talked and talked and they've known everything, and they need to go into an interior journey with some kind of guidance. And so that's why I wrote the book the way I did. You could take it that way, and then you could every once in a while check with somebody about a question. I got here, but I got stuck. Ultimately, I believe in a most foundational way, we're all here to help each other come home. And that may be that some people do things that aggravate us, but that's a blessing because it will show you a hole. I call them hole helpers. And there'll be other people who will show you things about yourself that you alone would never notice. So the answer is yes and the answer is no. That was not. That was the best I could do.
Thank you.
Yeah. Anyone else? No? We're good? Thank you. Thank you very, very much. And if you want to be on my mailing list to just know about new YouTubes and that kind of thing, please feel free. I have some business cards up here if you want a way to find me. And you're free to look at these books. I do particularly want to give this book to you, Jeanette. And the reason is because you told me, I won't tell her story, but you can ask her, but I'll hint. You told me that it is true that your family was affected by war. And I want to honor that you told me that on this trip, because I didn't know you. And I'll take my sticky out so you have a virgin book. But it's to thank you very much. You can have it after anybody wants to look at it. And thank you very much. This is just my joy to share and connect with people.